Uh, I'll I'll move us along then, just to make best use of time, to welcome you formally and go through what we'll be doing. Today's focus is to give you an update on the progress and of the initiatives that are being taken forward through the Strategic Connections Group, and we'll also make sure we've included an update from the ESO on similarly the updates and delivery around the 5-point plan initiatives to improve connections outcomes for customers. So welcome again to everyone. What we will do is, unfortunately, Andy's had an urgent personal commitment come up, so I will cover a bit of an update generally for the context and the focus of the Strategic Connections Group. Laura will give that update. Laura Henry will give that update on the ESO 5-point plan. And then we will get into updates from each of the solution groups being taken forward under the Strategic Connections Group around distribution queue management, transmission and distribution interface and technical limits solution, and battery storage connections. We're going to try and make those as punchy as possible so that we can leave time for questions and answers. And so, like I mentioned, please do think of those questions, put them in the chat, and we'll try and get through as many as possible. So that's the plan for today. And if we go to the next slide, we'll just, I won't ask everyone to come off mute and say hello. We'll introduce as we go. But just, to say, my name's David Bohr. I'm the Director of Electricity Systems for the ENA. I'll just be comparing, and we'll make sure we get the experts and the leads on each solution speaking at detail. Matt White's joined us from UK Power Networks and will give us a detailed update on the transmission and distribution technical limit solution. And he's supported as well by Dan Clark from National Grid Electricity Transmission for Q&A. James DeVrant also joining us from UK Power Networks, presenting on the distribution queue management solution and supporting in Q&A. Laura Henry for joining us from National Grid ESO to take us through the update on the 5-point plan, and Malcolm Bevington from SP Energy Networks taking us through the solution on battery storage, supported by Russell Bryant for Q&A. And again, Andy gives us apology. So we're all here and keen to get going. So I'll move us along then, just to give a quick run through and a reminder of the context. I suspect many on the group will be well aware of these, some of the context and the challenge faced on connections, but we will, just to reiterate it and set the scene. It is worth remembering, as always, that in many ways the UK is a victim of its own success. There's been significant progress made in decarbonising the system, with 50 gigawatts of renewable electricity projects already connected to the networks since 1992. Supporting the transition to a net zero country and energy supply. But it's clear that far more progress needs to be made to continue to connect customer projects to the grid to support 2035. And it is clear that the length of queue and the time it's taking to connect to the network is a challenge that we are all extremely focused on responding to and improving as much as possible at pace. Clearly, this has been driven by a huge increase in connection requests that we have seen come in recent years. Over 164 gigawatts of newer connection requests were received at transmission alone in the 12 months up to October last year. So this is really showing a huge inflection point and step change in how much customers are trying to seek to the network, and that is the context in which we are facing these challenges, particularly noting that we know not all of those progress at the same rate, and not all of them will go on to final build and connection, with some estimates at transmission level being that only 30 to 40% of the projects go on to completion. So a very quick reminder of the context. I'm sure you are all very well aware of the challenge faced and the importance of it, and some of the things that we are trying to address. So moving on to the next slide, again, as a reminder, the Strategic Connections Group started work in earnest earlier this year to take forward 3 prioritized solutions to respond to that challenge and take them forward at pace. We had published our action plan with a commitment to delivery in April this year. And there have been a few updates via our newsletter and through a few additional webinars that have been since then, but we're pleased to be able to give you a status update on all 3 of the actions being taken forward there today. First, around moving to a more active management of the distribution queue, moving towards first ready, first connected, and away from first come, first served. The second being changing how transmission and distribution coordinate to manage the queue where the capacity requests are interactive, and setting technical limits at each grid supply point that allow distribution customers to connect to the network more rapidly. And third, changing how storage connects to the network, and so the engineering approaches and assumptions and technical details that allow us to connect storage and you best utilize the capacity on the network at the same time. We're supported, all of those actions have been supported by, we're continuing to focus on making sure we engage with you through events like today and to collect the right amount of data that informs these actions and to continue to deliver them as well in coordination with the ESO's 5-point plan. So on the next slide, then, we'll give a bit of an update and a reminder of where this sits from a delivery schedule point of view, which again, I will do at a high level summary, and then you'll be able to see much more detail within each solution delivery update. But at a very high level, we're very pleased to be able to say that we had delivered on track and distribution queue management is in active implementation. And we've been pushing hard on the transmission and distribution interface solution with the first phase of sites now in active deployment and some additional phases coming soon and in progress already to get to the next rounds of solutions and the next more complex sites for implementation to allow those sites to benefit from the technical limit solution. And we're also pleased to be able to confirm that we have been on track and gone live with our battery storage solution, initial tactical solutions approach, and you'll hear a bit more about that in the detailed updates as well as next steps. We're continuing to coordinate throughout this process with the ESO, both on the 5-point plan, but importantly also with the connections reform solution, so that the transmission and distribution interactive components of that are also continuing to be designed and progressed, as well as the overall solution that the ESO is taking forward there through their project. And as mentioned, we're continuing to collect data and continuing to focus on external engagement to support this. So a very quick run through of the schedule. I won't go through any more detail than that now, because I want to get to handing over to the solution leads to give you updates across the program. First, handing over to Laura Henry to take us through update on the ESO 5-point plan.
Thanks very much, David. Hi, everyone. I'm Laura Henry. I'm the Policy and Change Manager in the ESO Connections team, and my team is responsible for delivering the ESO's 5-point plan. So the 5-point plan was launched in February this year, and it's a set of tactical initiatives to improve connections ahead of the wider connections reform project that the ESO is also leading on. So the 5-point plan compromises of tech amnesty, a change to our construction planning assumptions, a change to the way we treat energy storage, queue management, and non-firm offers. So I'll just give a very quick update on each of those points. So tech amnesty, so this was our first tech amnesty that we launched since 2013. We received 8.1 gigawatts of applications, and we had confirmation in August from Ofgem that we could recoup the costs from the tech amnesty through to NUOS. Since then, we've then gone back out to all customers to understand if they still want to be part of the tech amnesty. And unfortunately, we have had around 3 gigawatts of capacity drop out. That is for various reasons, such as some projects had to continue to develop and order plan, etc., and therefore is no longer viable to terminate. Some customers have got interest in other points of the 5-point plan and therefore wanted to see those through and therefore wanted to keep their current tech. We're now in the process of terminating those agreements where customers wanted to terminate and reducing tech in those agreements where customers wanted to reduce some of their tech down. And we've got a commitment from Ofgem to finish all of this by September 2024 at the latest. However, I would hope that we would get it all completed before then. Moving on to points 2 and 3, so I'll cover them together. So the ESO did some analysis on our construction planning assumptions and found that actually only around 30 to 40% of customers actually connect, that have a connection agreement with us. And therefore, we have changed our construction planning assumptions from assuming that 100% of all connection agreements are going to connect and bringing that down to 30 to 40%. At the same time, we've changed in the background the way that we treat storage in our studies and are modelling it to as close to 0 megawatts as possible. And the two of those points combined make something that we call the transmission works review, which is where we're working with all three TOs to hopefully bring connection dates forward and reduce works in agreements. In England and Wales, we introduced something called the two-step offer process along with NGET. And this is just because of the number of applications that NGET was receiving. It was not going to be possible to change all the construction planning assumptions in the contracted background, as well as kind of continuing with the number of offers that we receive. So we introduced the two-step offer process. So customers are currently receiving a light touch first offer, and they will receive a full offer by the 1st of March. Moving on to queue management. So CMP 376 is the transmission level code mod that was raised to allow queue management milestones to be put into agreements and essentially give the ESO the rights to terminate where possible or where needed. CMP 376 is currently with Ofgem for a decision. We are hoping that they will make a decision by the 10th of November, which is the date that they've published on their website. So we're currently working very closely with Ofgem on any follow-up conversations that they might have or any questions that they might have around the mod, because it is an ESO raised mod. And in the background, we're continuing to write a substantial guidance document and work with all three TOs on how we will implement this policy, depending on which of, well, if any of the solutions are chosen, are decided by Ofgem, but also there's quite a bit of difference between some of the alternatives that were raised. So making sure we're ready for implementation of those. And then finally on non-firm offers. So this is bringing energy storage customers on non-firm once the enabling works are completed. We're currently, so a policy was published on this in June by the ESO. We're currently working with all three TOs on this. With England and Wales, so NGET's area, we are in the process of releasing connection agreements for the first tranche. So NGET have split it into different tranches and kind of starting to scope out what tranche 2 might look like. In the Scottish TO areas, they are taking a slightly different approach in that they want to conclude the transmission works review first before then moving on to non-firm offer development. So we continue to work with both Scottish TOs on this as well. And then just before I finish, if you could just go on to the next slide. There is a very quick timeline I'll just quickly cover, just showing all of the different parts of the 5-point plan and kind of key timescales associated with them. As we've had feedback before that it'd be good to see a clear picture of when we're going to deliver each of these points. So tech amnesty, as I mentioned, needs to be concluded by September 24, but we are in the process of kind of finalising the changes to those agreements. Queue management decision should be made in November, and then we'll look to implement. Energy storage, the battery modelling and the CPA review is ongoing. The studies are nearly finished with NGET's area, and SPT and SSENT are going to conclude this in November, and then we'll start issuing offers. And then non-firm, we're in the initial phase now, and then it will continue out kind of across the rest of next year. And that was all I was going to update on. So thank you very much.
I've seen some questions coming in. I am going to propose that we'll hold those for the Q&A session, and let's keep going through all of the updates, but I'll make sure we cover, do keep putting questions in the chat, and I'll make sure we cover those when we get to Q&A. Keep us moving forward then. I'd like to introduce James to take us forward through the update on that first solution around distribution queue management.
Thanks, David. Good morning, all. So the scope of the distribution queue management exercise was on projects which either had or were accepted prior to milestones being introduced in 2017, where we hadn't seen progress or there hadn't been a connection yet, and there was no transmission constraint acting on those potential connections. So the main thrust of this was to make sure that where there were no milestones, so projects accepted up until 2017, that milestones were entered into those contracts to ensure that those projects could progress. Or if there was an inability to accept that things would need to progress at pace, then potentially termination would be the last resort that would be open. And then for those that have milestones in their contracts, again, typically post 2017, we would look to ensure that those milestones and the progress against those milestones was progressing. If it hadn't been, then we would make sure that we either insist that there is evidence of progress, or potentially reset with a new set of E&A milestones and track going forward. That's a scope that we have played with so far. Going forward, we would implement some of those solutions for very old demand connections. So we're talking about 2017 acceptances and prior to that. So that's a bit of a just definition of the scope. So far, we knew that we were going to sort of identify a number of projects which hadn't progressed or wouldn't ultimately progress, and we've got that to 60 contracts now, which we've actually cancelled. By all but very few of those, all of them have been by bilateral discussion between the DNOs and the customers. But we're getting to the sharp end now. Those 60 contracts are worth 1.4 gigawatts of cancelled capacity. But I think we're fairly confident at least doubling that in order to go through more unilateral cancellations where we just simply haven't had any response from customers who've had these contracts and are behind or without milestones. So we're confident of getting to certainly a 3 to 4 gigawatt territory over the next few months when we conclude this activity. The idea of this was to work in parallel with the transmission and distribution work, which Matt's just about to update on. This should create some spare capacity both at transmission and distribution, where there will remain only distribution constraints, assuming we can effectively promote customers who want to connect to distribution but currently have transmission constraints, where that capacity headroom has been created because of these cancellations. So that's a brief update. It is likely that we, as a community, the DNOs will be holding much more rigid line on making those milestones, because we realise we've got to make sure progress is swift, or we take action to manage those contracts out. So that's a key message for the community. Milestones are here, and we do need to track progress. Okay, that's up to me, David.
Thank you very much, James. Great. Well, we'll keep moving forward then. I'd like to introduce and hand over to Matt White to take us through the update on the transmission and distribution interactive queue solution.
Thanks, David. Morning, everyone. So this action is really around creating those clear technical boundaries between the transmission and distribution. So at the interface point, with a view to enable us to better manage and optimize the distribution queue, and ultimately accelerate customers that are ready to connect and do this on a non-firm basis, and as it stands on an interim basis. So I'm going to just give you some progress updates on this slide, and then I'll take you into a bit more detail on the next couple of slides. So where we are at the moment, we've designed the methodology for setting technical limits, and we've done this through working collaboratively across DNOs, TOs, and the ESO. We've now commenced implementation for 52 priority GSPs. So this is phase 1A of the program, of which will be multiple phases. So that's 52 sites, 18 gigawatts, potentially 411 customers that can come forward under phase 1A. There is a secondary phase to phase 1. So you might remember we initially called this phase 1, and now we split it in phase 1A and phase 1B. Phase 1B has allowed us to target some sites with limited fault level capacity. So that's a phase that will follow on shortly behind phase 1A. And we've identified 20 sites that have qualified for that. That will be over 12 gigawatts, servicing potentially again up to 339 customers. In terms of what we've got planned next, we need to get some principles around visibility and control. I'll talk a little bit to that on the following slide, and design and implement the methodology for phase 2 and the other future phases that we've got planned. So the aim is, wherever possible, we'll be looking to get maximum coverage across the GSPs that are currently constrained and sitting behind those long lead time transmission constraints. DNOs are now actively engaging with customers and releasing EOIs. I have a slide on that, so I'll talk a little bit more to that in a second. The big headline here really is phase 1, and it is only phase 1, 30 gigawatts, releasing around 750 customers. It's a really good news story for the first phase, and hopefully more to come. So if we can move to the next slide, please. So the changes that are being made, as I said, are really setting those technical limits at the grid supply points. Those grid supply points, as I say, where currently we're seeing those restrictions at transmission. So the aim will be to provide customers with a non-firm arrangement where they so wish. This is not mandatory. It will require customers to respond to expressions of interest and state their desire to move forward with this option. But the aim really here is to enable more agile and shovel-ready schemes to come forward, and do that on a tailorable and uncompensated basis. On visibility and control, I touched on that just a second ago. So whilst we've got these technical limits, and DNOs will be using their active network management systems or DERM systems to manage against those limits, we do also need air cover from a separate visibility and control scheme, which will allow the ESO, if required, if system issues arise, to be able to provide a secondary control over and above those limits. Move to the next slide, please. So the expressions of interest for phase 1A are underway. So some have already started, some are about to start, and really most of those across England and Wales will happen in sort of October and November. As I say, there is a requirement for those that are contacted to please respond to that expression of interest if you want to partake. So the expressions of interest are currently targeting the contracted parties that's sitting behind that transmission reinforcement, and I'll talk a little bit to what it means for new customers coming forward in a minute. As I've already said, phase 1A is releasing 18 gigawatts, so a significant amount, and we plan to run separate expressions of interest to cover the next phase of work in due course. And again, just really the headline here, this is going to give us the ability to accelerate connections in some areas by up to 10 years or more. So as I say, a really real good news story. In terms of the responses that you'll get off the back of those expressions of interest, there'll be a bit of work going on around gaining technical competency and then running through to establish how those variation offers are then dispersed and sent across to customers at each of the sites. Can I have the next slide, please? So I just thought I'd sort of head off some of the frequently asked questions, and I'm sure you've got a lot more, hopefully, that we can answer in a Q&A session. So I'll just sort of run through what we think are probably the top 5 frequently asked questions that we're getting at a DNO level. So which projects qualify, and when will I be able to benefit? As I've just said, it's going to be current. You know, the first pass is at those customers that are contracted. They've gone through project progression and are sitting there on Appendix Gs. So DNOs will be writing out to those customers through those expressions of interest, and you'll be able to benefit by responding to those variation offers, with giving us a view that you're ready to move forward. In terms of the levels of curtailment, that will be on a site-by-site basis. Each DNO will, for each of the schemes that gets the variation offer, will provide a view as to what that curtailment may look like over the coming years. In terms of how this will affect new customers, it's not going to be mandated. As I said, this is very much an opt-in. what we are looking to do is be able to provide new customers coming forward where there are no fault level restrictions. Notice that there is a non-firm option. However, to get the full extent of your offer, this will still need to follow the normal project progression route, but we will give you notification if that non-firm access is available at a site. So how will you know? As I said, we're writing out to those customers currently affected, but DNOs will be in due course publishing through their websites where technical limits are now in place. Yes, your current T's and C's will remain in place as it stands, but of course, this is really an opportunity to get connected sooner. And for those that are closer and ready to go, the sooner they connect, the more access they're likely to have. In terms of actually staying on the flexible arrangement, there is a work stream and discussions underway as to whether this could be potentially used as an enduring solution. At this moment in time, it still remains an interim option, but we will notify customers in due course should that change. So obviously there are other questions. As David said, we've got a Q&A at the end, so I'll leave that to then. We can go to the final one of our slides, please, David. So I'm not going to go through this verbatim, and I'll let Dan come in and talk a little bit as to progress and next steps. But clearly, there's a lot that's been done, there's a lot to do, and all of this is being coordinated around that 5-point plan and connections reform work that Laura spoke to earlier. But Dan, if I pass over to you, perhaps you could run through in a bit more detail.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Good morning, everybody. Yeah, so as Matt said, we are well underway with phase 1A. Just because of the sheer volume of sites, we've broken up phase 1A into 4 tranches. The first of the four tranches, sorry, is now with the DNOs, and we're working through the finer points of technical limits and some of the T's and C's around it. Phase 1B, as Matt mentioned, is 20 sites. That initiated on Monday, just gone, with a view to getting updated agreements to the DNOs in kind of 6 to 8 weeks. So again, well underway with that. Phase 1B includes some level of assessments, so technical studies from all from the TOs involved, working collaboratively with the DNOs and the ESO. But a tremendous success in being able to roll out technical limits to 72 sites of the GSPs, with a view to then rolling out technical limits to the remaining GSPs probably late into the year, early next year. So activities that are running in parallel. Obviously, the Scottish TOs and the DNOs are working on technical limits as well, with a slightly lagging behind, just simply because we are using the Appendix Gs to kind of help map out technical limit requirements. And the Scottish TOs yet haven't got Appendix Gs, but are working through that with the ESO and their DNOs to roll out technical limits. And as Matt mentioned a number of times in his previous slides, there are parallel activities that are underway already to try and map out what phase 2 and future phases will look like. Phases 2 and on being more complicated sites where there are multiple DNOs at the same site. So us trying to work out how you might roll out a technical limit if there are 2 DNOs or more in some cases at the same GSP. But yeah, well underway with a view to getting at least the majority of those 72 contracts out with the DNOs ready to sign before the end of the year. So a good success. And I won't cover any more than that, David, so happy to move on to the next section, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt and Dan. That's great, and really, as you say, some awesome details and progress there. So I look forward to hearing if there are any further questions. I'll hand over to Malcolm now to take us through the battery storage connection solution update.
Okay, thank you, David. Good morning, all. So as many of you be aware, the battery storage work is focused on the level of large-scale energy storage that we're seeing across the industry. I'll just start by putting that into context before we jump into solutions. So at distribution alone, this has grown to over 50 gigawatts, with much of that contracted over the last year. That's nearly the same level of GB peak demand. And if we also include transmission, the contracted capacity of storage is almost 3 times GB peak demand. So what does this mean? This provides a huge opportunity for decarbonisation, but it also presents us with some fairly significant network challenges. So really important here that we make best use of this capacity, ensuring that it's an enabler to decarbonisation and doesn't cause delays. So some of the key objectives of the battery storage workstream have been to ensure that we're making best use of capacity, ensure that we're enabling efficient connections, ensure investments to add capacity are made at the right time and that they're done efficiently, and to ensure that battery storage customers are treated the same across all DNOs. So since March, we've been working on a range of solutions. These have been very much focused on things that can be implemented quickly. So essentially within the current rules without, for example, changing standards. We've engaged with Ofgem. Ofgem are supportive of the proposals. There is a letter of support that's published on their website. We were also wanted to ensure that we had consistency across the industry. So we've produced detailed E&A guidance documentation. This also provides full transparency. So they're now published to the E&A website. So feel free to take a look at those. They set out the methodology and all of the options, and the solutions contained within the documents are now being implemented by DNOs. So that was from the 30th of September, so the beginning of this month. Solutions focus very much on 3 key areas. So it includes access rights for any new connection applications. It also includes our approach to security of supply assessments and how we use LCT forecasts in our modelling assumptions. There's an awful lot of detail in the documentation that's published, but I'll have a go at providing a high-level summary. So 3 solutions. Solution 1 provides very much a standardized approach to import and export capacity rights for any new storage applications. So the aim here is to give customers a more common experience, so storage customers are all treated the same across all DNOs. It aims to optimize network capacity and facilitate more efficient connections. And I guess a point of note here, this only applies to new connections. It doesn't apply to either those that are already connected or already contracted. Solution 2 provides a common approach to the treatment of storage when we're undertaking network assessments. This is all aimed to ensure that we facilitate optimum and most efficient network investment. And solution 3 is very much focused on providing a common approach to the incorporation of LCT growth forecasts in all of our planning assumptions. So when we're modelling the network, we include growth forecasts, and that's very much aimed at helping to ensure that we can accommodate domestic LCTs. So to recap, the benefits of these solutions are more common customer experience across all DNOs, making best use of network capacity, and facilitating more efficient connections. So what does that mean in terms of next steps? So DNOs are going to continue with the implementation. As I mentioned before, that started 30th of September, so that's now well underway. And as a group, we're also considering longer term solutions. So a lot of work going on at the moment, progressing socioeconomic analysis, very much aimed at determining if we need to progress any further changes and the timing of that. So that's a brief update. There is a lot more detail in the documentation that's published. We've got the Q&A, but also if you have any further questions, feel free to contact myself or indeed any members of the team.
Great, thank you, Malcolm, and thank you all. I think that's covered all of the detailed updates that we want to provide and present from our side. I really hope everyone's found those useful. We'll move now into Q&A. We've got a good 20 minutes to cover questions. I've seen lots coming in through the chat. Maybe just to kick us off, there's a theme around a few questions for Laura. I'll let you see how much you feel that you can comment on Ofgem's CMP 376 question or not. That might be something to follow up with Ofgem separately. But there's a theme around what the timelines for the two-step offer in terms of will that move back to a one-step offer, and what does that mean for customers coming forward now? And then a few questions, if you could answer a bit more detail on that, and then also a few questions about how the Scottish companies are using the battery storage modelling techniques across the implementation across Britain. If you could cover a bit more detail on that, Laura.
Yeah, that's fine. I'll just move down in question order, if that's okay. So the first one, so CMP 376, so happy to provide kind of an update on this. So the decision date was the 15th of September. There are a few questions that Ofgem are asking us around kind of the different WACOMs and how they'd be implemented in the original and how that would be implemented. But I wouldn't say there's anything kind of major, like there's no major concerns coming out of the question. So I think Ofgem have said that, you know, the 10th of November is a backstop date and they would hope to make a decision before then. So we are as eagerly awaiting a decision as everybody else on that one. Moving on to the next one. So when will two-step offers move back to step one? So the deadline for this is the 1st of March 24. So in theory, like you say, if you apply in December, then you should get a full offer off the back of that. So yeah, that is the timescales that we're currently adhering to. Moving on to the next one about SPT and SSENT. So yeah, they are using the energy storage modelling as part of the kind of combined points 2 and 3 of the two-step offer. The only difference between SPT and SSENT and NGET is that in terms of the non-firm offer development, they are just taking a slightly different approach to when they're looking at implementing that. Just going to keep moving down. Will construction planning assumptions be applied retrospectively to current? Yes, so the way that the transmission works review is working is that it applies. So we're currently doing the studies for the contracted background, and then any new offers that then come out after we've finished that piece of work will have the new construction planning assumptions applied to them. Which is also why in NGET's area, the two-step offers will come out after we've finished the transmission works review, because we need to do the contracted background first before you then go back through and do the second step offers. Please could you, sorry, I'm just going to have to read this question. I mean, I don't know, that next one about the treatment of batteries. Dan, I don't know if you want to kind of answer that one from NGET's point of view, because they're saying about NGET have said that it's not achievable. The batteries are looking more like full tech to be studied.
So we've seen a range, to be fair, depending on the region that it's in. So I think the ESO BES policy talked about batteries being set to zero in areas with high concentrations of renewables. So where there are regions in the network which are where non-renewables are more dominant, then we have seen in some of the CPAs that we've assessed from the year 2026 to the year 2037, where there are some batteries that are dispatched, not to full tech or reg cap, but not zero. But in the most instances, though, batteries have been attritioned out to zero, with a few exceptions of some regions in certain years as well. But the idea around it is that batteries should be treated as a help, not a hindrance, and that is consistent across T and D as well.
Thanks, Dan. I think that concludes the questions for me, David, unless there's any others that are further down. But I'm around to answer any more.
Thank you. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Dan. That's helpful, and hopefully that's answered the questions. I'll move us down then. A few that I think have been covered as we've gone through, in terms of Ben on DNO and DSOs applying common methodologies around battery operations assumptions. Hopefully Malcolm's run through of the solutions and the approaches from what's been released at SCG at distribution level has answered that question. The very, very short version being yes. And then on the next question around key milestones under queue management being consistent, again, the simple answer to that is yes. And I think, James, you've answered that in the queue, and a few in the chat,
Yep.
A few others have, that there's consistent approach. I think the only thing I'd add to that is that we have gone through steps, and I know the ESO and transmission companies have been looking to make transmission milestones as consistent as possible. There are ways in which they're different because the processes are different, but overall the industry is quite focused on consistency, and there is that publication that James has helpfully put in the chat.
Just to add to that very quickly, David, we mapped the transmission queue management milestones on the ENA queue management guidance. So the only difference is that there is no milestone for a transmission because that's the TD interface in the ENA one. Sorry to jump in.
No, it's all. Thank you, Laura. Good point to make. And then for T&D limits rollout, there are a few questions around, are they rolled out across all DNOs, and when will the sites be notified? Hopefully, again, Matt's presentation has covered that in a good amount of detail and answered those questions. Unless there's anything else you'd add, Matt, at this stage, I think we've given a good update on those. Hopefully that's been that's closed the question. And then there's another question around the study parameters in the battery and construction assumptions that we've hit from Grant. I think we've answered that, unless there's anything else you'd add, Laura, in terms of whether or not they apply to new connections or if they're being applied to base ones. I believe we've answered that, unless there's anything else you'd add.
Yeah, no, I think we've answered that one. Thank you.
I'll cover the membership of the SCG and the SCG subgroups. The answer is all network operators are represented in those working groups. We remain focused on making sure we're coordinated and aligned, and because we are implementing these consistently as far as possible across all networks, then the SCG groups, both at the primary level and at the subgroup level, have all networks involved. So there is no differentiation or kind of different groups there. There's a question around non-firm connections being curtailable and impacts on business cases. I know, Matt, you've mentioned confirmed in the frequently asked questions that the curtailment estimates will be included as part of the revised offers. Anything else you'd add to that?
I don't think so. I mean, as I said, the position at the moment on the solution is that it will be interim. I think so those discussions are underway as to whether it be enduring, and that would then defer the need for assets. But that's an ongoing piece of work.
Thank you. In terms of the lists of GSPs, first and foremost, as you'll have seen from the slides, there's a very clear program of when expressions of interests and individual DNO webinars will be held. So first and foremost, engaging with your DNOs is the first port of call. Very happy to take away notes and see if we can collate that and see what more joint publication we can provide or visibility. But please do make sure you're following up with your DNOs directly around understanding exactly which GFP is in a particular area are going forward under phase 1. I think then just moving down into the question, further questions, it looks like that there may be a few more questions around the battery storage site, battery storage assessments from Grant. I think double checking, Malcolm, if you can provide a bit more detail on that at a distribution level, but Grant, please let us know if you're in, if you've got also questions at transmission level. I think we've hopefully answered those, but Malcolm, if you can give a bit more detail on the assumptions and the considerations that are in the solutions, then that would be helpful.
Yeah, sure. I'll perhaps actually turn to Russell on this in terms of the technical detail, but we have very much changed our approach to battery storage modelling with the inclusion of diversity factors. But perhaps either Russ or Jules can just add to that.
Yeah, sure. So in terms of solution one, being able to at distribution level, they'll have access, batteries will have access rights that are not curtailed under intact normally, and then for solution two, it's how they're treated under P2, so security of supply assessments, and includes how we treat them under DSR, but also diversity factors, as Mel was saying. So looking back the way at historic usage of a large number of battery sites across all DNOs, and taking sensible assumptions around the amount of network that we need to secure, so that we're not triggering reinforcement of the network that would be underutilized in effect.
I would probably just add that on the detail is in the publicly available guidance note. It's always a balance in these presentations as to how much detail you provide, and we didn't want to kind of flood the slides with the equations and the underlying methodology, but it is all set out in the guidance note. So that's probably the best first place to start if you want to get into the detail around how this was developed.
Thank you all. That's really helpful. I think one final point of that thread to just pick up on is there's a question around the application of these approaches to the existing queue. Any additional detail around the next phase, or just kind of signposts that you could add to that, Malcolm?
Yeah, so as I think I touched on at the end of the presentation, there is further work ongoing now, looking at whether we should deploy any additional options. But before doing that, we're progressing some quite detailed socio-economic analysis to justify any further solutions. So that work will progress until the very beginning of next year, and it will inform the work plan from there onwards. So further details will come out about any further changes that we're proposing. It is worth adding to that as well that under solution 2, as Russell touched on, we are taking a different approach to our modelling assumptions and security of supply assessments that does change the way that we model battery storage, and should facilitate more efficient connections.
Great, thank you. So another timescales question for the T&D limit solution. Matt, there's a question about where in those timescales the rollout and commissioning of the A&M systems might sit.
Yeah, I mean, simplistically, having a functioning A&M system is a prerequisite for sites being considered under phase 1A. In terms of where we are for each DNO, and obviously I'm not going to go through that. Some DNOs already have it in place and are using it on a widespread basis. Others are getting into a position where that becomes business as usual. So I think what I would say to that one is that for those sites that are in phase 1A, there is a prerequisite, and hence the A&M will need to be in place before the site can be commissioned. But I would discuss that on an individual basis with each of the DNOs.
Great, thank you for that. There was another question around the timelines for Appendix G in Scotland. I am conscious that we don't have the Scottish companies fully represented at transmission level, as well as distribution level. So unless unless any of the panel would like to kind of give a view on that, I think that might be one that we'll have to take away. Gently pausing there for a second, but we'll make sure we follow up separately, just with the right inputs on that.
As I say, David, I think the Scottish TOs are working through the legal and kind of contractual requirements with the ESO, having spoken to kind of Brendan Clark and David Adams before. So I think they're rolling out technical limits and Appendix Gs at the same time via project progression applications, and those will start again as per, I think it was slide 18 in the deck, before Christmas as well, and into the new year.
Thank you. That's great. So on another question for Malcolm and the battery storage group around solution 4, which was acknowledged in the public letter of support, but with still work ongoing. If we can give an update on thinking around that.
Yeah, sure, David. So in Ofgem's letter, there was some additional questions that were asked around solution 4 and the justification, and this all relates to curtailment limits under access SCR. So we're still undertaking some work on that in the background. Analysis is being undertaken to determine how we go forward with that. So I think once that has concluded, we'll be in a position to provide a further update.
Great, thank you. So a few next comments we'll just quickly respond to. There was a point made around the there being a curtailment spreadsheet created by Ofgem during the Access SCR significant code review. I think we'll just take that away as a note. I think it's really good to point to, and things like that can be really beneficial to align to and provide clarity to customers. Take that as a note away in terms of how information is communicated to customers and where and how much we can align with that as much as possible to get a good amount of likes as well. So useful point to take away. So there was a question about interactivity between phase 1 sites getting revised offers under technical limits, and whether or not these new offers take into account new CPAs. I wonder if Matt or Laura, if there's any comment on how the CPA modeling might impact those offers or not under the limits methodology.
I mean, in terms of how simplistically, in terms of how the phase 1 sites are going to be taken forward, this will be based really on the modelling that's already been done to date. So there was no additional modelling done regarding those phase 1 sites. The methodology requires a calculation. It doesn't require wholesale modelling. As Dan said, for the phase 1B, slightly different, a bit of modelling was required. So I think, Dan, unless you want to jump in and add anything different, as it stands, they're not taking in any sort of impacts on CPAs or storage. But happy for Dan to jump in.
So I will jump in if that's all right. So Matt's right, absolutely. So the way that we've calculated the limits is a simplistic calculation using Appendix Gs where they do exist at GSPs already. The impact, though, that revised planning assumptions through revised CPAs and the year-long assessment of TWR will impact it is if there is capacity to be reallocated, and that is given to a DNO based on the methodology that's being worked through at the moment with the ESO and Ofgem, then that may free up firm capacity, whereas obviously technical limits frees up non-firm capacity. So that there is a tangible link between CPA reviews and technical limits. And once we as NGET have concluded our studies, and once we've worked through the finer points of how we then intend to allocate that capacity, if we need to revise technical limits and contracts with the DNOs, then we will work that through. And I guess further updates will be available later in the month, later in the year, with a view that TWR phase 1 studies will be complete in 2 to 3 weeks. So certainly by the end of the month.
Great. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Dan. That's helpful. We are coming to time. there are a number of more questions around the battery storage solution that we probably won't have time to get to. But again, I think the point that Jules made there is important, that please do refer to the detailed guidance. We won't been able to go through the weeds of some of the engineering considerations and details there, but there is much more detailed guidance there available and published on the ENA website that please do refer to that. I think the final question we'll just take before we close and thank the speakers is there's a question around where infrastructure GSPs sit in the technical limits phases. If Matt or Dan, you can just comment on that.
Yeah, just while I've got the mic then. So I was going to reply in the chat, but yeah, yes, they are planned to be rolled out. That's the complex sites that I referred to when I ran through the timeline. So there is a plan to roll it out for sites like Walpole and East Claydon and other infrastructure substations. So these are the more complicated ones because the metering arrangements are different for shared sites, and how do you kind of give two limits at the same site for 2 or 3 different DNOs. But yes, the plan is to roll it out as part of phase 2, and we're at the drawing board stage at the moment for that. I don't know whether, Matt, you want to add anything to that or not?
No, I think that's you've covered it off, Dan, really, in the main.
Great. Perfect. Well, and we are at time. So as predicted, lots of Q&A to get through, and apologies for those that we didn't answer in full detail, but lots of materials to follow up and support on some of them, on those more details. A huge thank you from me for everyone that's joined and your interest and participation. We do hope this has been helpful. And a big thank you also from me to Laura, James, Matt, Malcolm, Dan, and Russell and Jules and all for participating and supporting answering the questions. We'll close there. We will circulate the recording and the materials, and I hope you all have a great day. Thank you very much again.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks very much.
Thanks.